learning and development products, both for now and in the not too distant future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some people might have caught me sending a message to everyone instead of to you, David, but we're working against some pretty
yeah, just a bit.
All right. So today we're talking about learning and development and the demands of learning in today's very special context, not to say unparalleled, unprecedented ever again, but in a very weird context that is here and that is here to stay, David. So perhaps it's useful to introduce what is happening to L&D and what are the big questions around learning today to start with.
Sure. So, to some degree, some of the questions have not changed in terms of how do we drive performance in our organisations. So that's very much kind of still the same question. But the platforms we use to drive performance in organisations, that is causing some interesting challenges. So you've got some organizations that were kind of very much kind of able to put a lot of their stuff online very, very quickly, and other organizations who are still working out how to transfer their face-to-face offering onto a digital platform and to get it out to their learners and to work out how their learners, their employees are accessing it, if they're accessing it, and are they doing anything with the learning. So yes, some pretty tough challenges for quite a few people in learning and development.
Amazing. And perhaps I haven't done justice to you by introducing you, but David Hayden is looking after our digital portfolio, but is also an professional who has been working across the profession for over 20 years, co-authored and authored a number of publications, and recently co-authored your latest book around learning and development, which we will link in below in the chat. So I guess we'll start off with the first of the many challenges that you've posed. I guess development can happen in so many ways, shape and forms, both formally and informally.
Yeah.
And so in this context, what would you say are some practical things that learning and development consultants or practitioners or HR teams can consider to develop people, knowing that, of course, we are in a context with low budgets, tight timeline, yeah, and we're asking people to be very agile and flexible?
Absolutely. So what I'd say first of all is absolutely make sure we are prioritizing what the organization needs us to prioritize, and that can change quite rapidly. So within that, we need to think about what are the absolute essentials we need to get out to people. The third thing I would say is let's forget that our people know some incredible detailed stuff already. So don't always assume we're starting from a starting point of our employees knowing nothing. And fourthly, I would say, let's really harness some of the things that we've got at our disposal to get information out there. And this is a real kind of opportunity to embrace the variety of different nuances of digital learning. So this webinar, yeah, so there's lots of webinars going on, but you mentioned it's being turned into a podcast. So, you know, that's kind of one opportunity that we can get a message out quite quickly to people, but also thinking around how we develop our managers to develop their teams as well. So we've got some examples that we've done internally at the CIPD where we've shared our knowledge from the learning team across the whole of the CIPD and really kind of getting people involved in a few things. So upskilling people to do things that they wouldn't normally do informally is actually having some real massive dividends, and really kind of we're getting some real nice surprising results. So give you an example of that. So kind of give you an example of a couple of those things that developing people at a team level. So obviously in a lockdown situation, we wanted to make sure that within our team we were checking in with people regularly. But our team had grown over the last 8 months from a team of 6 to a team of 16 to just before lockdown, our team was 36 in size. So there was a lot of kind of people who were not used to working with each other. There were a lot of people who kind of like knew their bit of the process, but didn't know what happened to the process afterwards. So we were very aware. So as a group of senior managers in the team, we were very aware that we needed to check in, but asking managers to check in individually with every employee that they had was also time consuming and added to the amount of time that we're on screen. So we introduced what we called a virtual tea at 3. Based in England, why would we not have tea at 3? So we had we have this virtual tea at 3 where initially the senior team in the learning team, we took responsibility for that. So we managed the platform, we managed the activities, and they were informal activities. So we do this tea at 3. We started off with very informal agenda, volunteered, gave people the option to join or not, but very quickly people realised that if they didn't join, they'd be missing out on some great stuff. But over a week or so, we started to encourage more of the team to run a tea at 3 session. So we've had things at tea at 3 where we've just done we've done a few quizzes, we've done a few recipe swaps. So what stands out is what tin of food have you got stuck in your cupboard that's been there for ages that you've no idea what to do with. So kind of people were sharing what they would do with this with this spare tin. So we were creating some great recipes. We've also done some baby pictures. So the team have sent baby pictures in. So guess who the baby is? You know, who did the baby turn out to be? We've done things based programs or based on movies or based on songs. One of our team is a Pilates instructor. She did a half-hour Pilates activity. So we've done a lot of different things, but what we found is that people who were not used to facilitating an online session, so their job as part of the process might have been to send out joining instructions, or their part of the process might be to send out materials to be printed, that kind of thing. They were volunteering to facilitate a half-hour activity with the rest of the learning team. And so just imagine what that's like, you know, kind of there's a few of us in the team who've been around, you know, 20 plus years doing this kind of thing day in, day out. And suddenly kind of quite a junior member of the team, they're taking responsibility to facilitate a learning session. So we by default have upskilled the wider team by having this half-hour check-in. What started as a let's just check in with everyone, see if everyone's all right. So from a very informal thing, it grew organic. I'd love to be able to say at the start of it, we had these explicit learning outcomes of why we started tea at 3, but we didn't. We just said we need to check in with people, and something amazing has come out of it. And we've now got a waiting list of people who want to take part in it. So two things. The control of that is now within the team. So instead of it being a senior manager in the team saying everyone needs to do this, there's responsibility within the team. But also the rest of the organisation are starting to say to us, what's the secret of your tea at 3? Lots of people are talking about your tea at 3. What's happening? So we're able to spread the message to the rest of the organisation. So that's just one example of taking advantage of the situations we face.
I think what you're saying is really interesting, because what could be first perceived as a quite shallow and game exercise, to be honest. It's
Yeah.
just literally grabbing a virtual coffee or tea for amongst us. Has actually turned into a learning opportunity, and it's helped the organization, one, actually identify skills that you didn't know you had within the team.
Absolutely,
and drive ownership for what you're talking about, is really driving ownership for the learning, people take responsibility for the learning that is happening. And it links back to the adult learning theories and social learning, because we started with social and we ended up circle with learning and social. I think that's a really, really interesting point. And again, very perhaps low cost item, something easy that managers can replicate easily.
Yeah, that's it. And some of the informal conversations that have happened with it. So I mentioned we grew from a very small team to 36 quite quickly. And it's created a few connections that wouldn't be. We've also done something else to help with that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's created some connections, and it's made a space where people within the team can say, how do you do that? I didn't know you could do that with, you know, and we're using Microsoft Teams. You know, people say, how do you do that? Even little tiny things like, how do you just highlight someone's first name instead of putting their whole name in? You know, and just so our knowledge of the platform we're using has kind of grown a lot. Yeah, it's been brilliant to be part of.
Yeah, that's absolutely really cool. I'd love to know if in the chat you want to put in comments or questions, please be free to do that throughout the session. But it'd be really interesting to know, as we're all working from home, presumably with learning technologies or at least some form of software, what are your key challenges, or what are some opportunities that you've been able to highlight through the use of that? So I guess moving on to, I think that was a really quick, for me, eye-opener, because honestly, when you first told me about Tea at 3, I thought, that's cute. And you know, and I think there are a lot of skeptics, and so to think actually it does drive a lot of things, and we're talking now about organization design and redesigning teams in function depending on the skills you have and the needs of the organization. And that's a great way to find out what people may be good at. As you said, like they're normally someone fine at something, they might actually be great at something else. So that links back into our next piece that we want to talk about today. You've mentioned in the beginning that we are now in this balancing act, L&D professionals are at least, between meeting today's organizational demands and prioritizing what's really important at the minute, but also not losing sight of the longer term big picture. So what can you kind of tell us about what ideas can we explore to evolving practice to meet these demands today?
Sure, yeah, so absolutely. So Jennifer's just put in the chat in terms of, sorry, my Northern English accent. Yeah, I'm very aware of my Northern, especially when I get excited, and I do get excited about learning and development. So it's actually tea, as in a cup of tea. People can have coffee, but yeah, tea at 3. So yeah, bit of iteration there. So Charlotte, you were asking around, you know, kind of what technologies can we harness for kind of some of the future. I think kind of a couple of things. One, it's start with what we've got. Okay, so it's very easy to fall into a trap of, you know, oh, you know, Google have got this amazing AI system, or you know, kind of the Australian mining company have got this amazing virtual reality system that costs thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. So it's very easy to get sucked into a trap in terms of what technology we haven't got. First of all, let's harness the technology we have got. And just because a system can do something doesn't mean to say you have to switch all those things on at once. So allow people to build up. And the other thing with technology, don't ever say to people, it's intuitive. Because if you've not come across something before, it is not intuitive. So I'm a big fan of Twitter. I'm not a big fan of Facebook. I wasn't on Facebook for years. I only joined Facebook because I'm part of a running club, and they put all their content for the running club on Facebook. So I had to join Facebook. And it is not, if you're used to Twitter, Facebook does things differently. So don't assume that people will be able to adapt quickly to any technology skills that you're putting forward. So you need to allow time for people to learn the technology as well as learn the content you are putting on the technology. And the golden rule with any content you're putting on technology is less is always more. So rather than cram it with everything you know, just put enough nuggets on there to get people excited and want to find out more for themselves and signpost them to where it is. So there were some thoughts from your question. I'm not sure I fully answered your question. There were a few other bits in there. So what bits have I missed, Charlotte, from the question you asked?
Sorry, I got stuck for a second.
Right.
Yeah, so you talked about less is always more. You and I talked about something which is really important as we're in the middle of transferring course and learning from face-to-face to digital, as will most of organizations be at the minute. And one of the big no-nos and mistakes that a lot of companies may do is to try and squeeze in a 5-day development program into a 3-hour web or a 3-day webinar, just packing stuff up. So obviously that would command an entirely different program, a webinar, just to talk about designing. But what would be perhaps tips that you can share here on developing for digital at this point in time?
Yeah. So in terms of developing content for digital at this time, first of all, as I said there, prioritize. What are the absolute musts? And of course, everyone's going to say, well, this is really important. This is really important. Yeah, but what is really, really important? And also, you know, kind of what content have you got that is out of date? So if you're talking about, I mean, leadership programs tend to be about 5 days in duration for some reason. What have you got in that content? What is out of date? So it gives us an opportunity to look at stuff. So if you've got things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in your leadership development, that's out of date. That was 1930s. And a lot of neuroscience has said it's wrong. Even Maslow himself says, I didn't mean it to be what it became. I just put it out there as a discussion point, and suddenly everyone's taking it on as a fixed model. So to focus on things. The second thing is give people options. So if you are, so say if you're doing a webinar like this, rather than starting at 1 o'clock and then working through 1 to 1:15, people saying, I can't hear, how do I get the video on? How do I access this? Start at 12:45 and say for the first 15 minutes, if you're not used to this platform, we're going to be around for the first 15 minutes just to talk through the practical functions. So at 1 o'clock, we can start the learning. So I'd kind of advise that separate the learning of the technology from the learning of the actual content. Also, don't default to Microsoft defaults, Outlook defaults. Microsoft defaults to on the hour and the half hour. Why do that? Why not make it 1:45? Why not make it 10 past? You know, don't necessarily default to some of the things that are there. Just because they're there doesn't mean to say we have to default, especially if we know we're jumping between meeting and meeting and meeting. The second thing is to think about how you can let people share what they know already. So the chat function is brilliant for that. The chat function is brilliant for that. So instead of lecturing at someone online, what do they know already? So that's great to kind of see in the chat, and it's a great engagement. And also, one of the things we found, going back to the T at 3 example, is there were a couple of people who very rarely spoke in the office, very, very shy. They are doing some awesome stuff in the chat box at T at 3 because some of the barriers, perceived barriers to interacting with others at work has been removed. So that's been great to see. So think about the functionality, think about how you get people to learn about the functionality, strip out some of the stuff that you don't really need that gets in the way, but present the info in a way that gets people excited about it. So at the end, you can say, look, there's always more to learn about this. And if you're interested, here are some resources. Here are the 2 or 3 resources I found really useful to help build up that.
Yeah, I think you're going back to 2 very important points that we've already kind of touched on. First one is the self-learning, adult learning of theory. So help people be a little bit more self-directed, allow them to seek out the information by themselves and take ownership of that learning, which is what happened with your T3, for example.
Yeah.
The second thing is the social part. So you said curation and community go hand in hand. And so share information and how it can be shared from one person to the next, whether that's something they found or a personal experience that others can benefit from, and really reinforce the learning. And these are all things we know when delivering face-to-face, but it just happens in a different way, where we perhaps have to think about it. What would be a coffee, a conversation around a coffee in the office, or where we pop in each other? We have to do more mindfully perhaps now. We will get into some of the questions, but it's really helpful if you tell us in the chat box, are we answering some of your key questions? Do you have more at the right time? I guess for today, we also wanted to talk about the impact that this is having on L&D and how we can embrace this, I say, our evolution, because it's an evolution. It's almost being a revolution for learning. Do you want to tell us a little bit more of your thoughts around how this whole thing is impacting L&D, not just now, but in the future, how it might change some of the things that we've always thought we'd do forever?
That's right. So at the CIPD, our stance for the past few years has been, look, there will always be a place for face-to-face training, but digital can free us up to do some amazing things in the face-to-face space, and let's take advantage of what we can do digital. And now we're kind of saying, ooh, right, we're not sure when we can open our doors for face-to-face. And our audience is quite a global audience, so very often we'll have people flying into London, or I've flown out to Dubai before now. So we're kind of not sure whether that's going to happen. So in terms of the future, we invest time in our own self-development, so we can make sure we're on top of the changes. So first of all, just with our learners, there's no magic pill we can take to give our learners to say, here's all the content. If we're finding learning some of this digital stuff a bit hard, then yeah, you're putting yourself in the shoes of your learners when they say this is hard, or you say you've got to change now, and your employees say, well, I don't feel that change. I don't understand why that change is happening. So if it's hard for us, then let's embrace the fact it's hard, but let's invest some time. We've got to invest some time. There's a company called Towards Maturity who do some research. They've been doing research for 15 years in learning and development. And they've been telling us for the whole 15 years that, learning and development do not develop themselves adequately enough. And the response to the pandemic has highlighted that in a lot of instances, where we've not had that agileness to move our information online. So it's not too late. It's not too late. But we do need to plan in time for our own development, and also think about your own social networks to learn that. So I've talked about curation and I've talked about community are both important, the social aspect. Think about how you interact with other learning and development practitioners and professionals. Think about how you can harness your own community to upskill yourself in terms of a lot of digital opportunity. Obviously, I'm going to say check in with your professional bodies, CIPD. Absolutely, we've got a load of help and advice around that. in terms of signposting people to various things, but it is around embracing what's there, but making it relevant for your context, for your organization, and for your learners' reality. So we need to be careful that we don't assume our working from home scenario is the same for our employees working from home scenario. So for instance, I'm quite lucky. My children are all grown up. One of them only still lives at home. She's classed as a key worker. My wife's classed as a key worker. So they're out most of the time. If this lockdown was 20 years ago, I'd be working from home with 3 kids under the age of 10. And that would have been a very different proposition. So what's the reality like for our employees? Just because we put a piece of information out there at 10 o'clock in the morning, or say, come on this webinar at 10 o'clock, it may be that our employees are conflicted with, well, do I support my child because there's a homeschooling class at 10 o'clock, or do I come on this webinar? So there's a real imbalance there. So think about some of the tools that are out there. Think about some of the things like podcasting, for instance. That's a really useful tool to get a quick 20-minute message there that people can listen to as and when they can listen to it, that I've got the top tips. Think about things like infographics. So a lot of compliance training could be created in an infographic. Think about the language you're using in terms from a digital space. So, are we using things like, here's some great top tips, or are we using language like, do not do this, do not do this, do not do this? Because they get 2 very different responses. So kind of go back, Charlotte, I know your kind of question was around, how can we develop ourselves in a digital space? Yes, make sure you've got to invest some time in this. There's no magic pill to take. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be clunky. It's about embracing your community and sharing ideas. And yeah, there are some things transferable from the face-to-face world, but less is more. What's relevant?
So I think on that note, David, we are having, unsurprisingly, quite a few questions around
Brilliant.
Conversion of face-to-face to digital learning. So I guess I'll start with the first thing. Each person has a different style of learning. How do you supplement e-learning and development to ensure learning objectives are met? And so the second question, which I think is really linked to that, is what are the rules of thumb around converting face-to-face digital learning? So I'll just preface that by saying that David and I and the team at the CIPD are working on converting, and I guess like you, we don't have a magic formula. We're still figuring it out, and I think that's what you're saying, David. It's a change, and it gives us an opportunity to also try and error in a very quick way. And I think there's really that fail fast, learn fast as well. One of the things, so I guess, how do you supplement EL&D to ensure learning objectives are met? So back to what, David, you were saying earlier, a learning experience is never just a workbook and a PowerPoint, even in a classroom. And I guess what we're seeing is a lot of companies are just forgetting about everything else that happens in a classroom and thinking, well, that's what we used to do, just have PowerPoints and talk to people. People or whatever. So you normally have these pre-learning, case study read, group project, between learning, wrap-ups in the end, work applications. So just because it's remote doesn't mean it can't happen. And I'll let you caveat that, David. And as the measuring the impact of L&D or converting face-to-face, again, that would come in an entire webinar of its own, perhaps. But David, we're still talking about L&D, right? So the platforms changed, but the principles are the same, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just our method of delivery. So just think, kind of 100 years ago, if we wanted to keep in touch with family and friends who lived a fair way from us, we would write them a letter. Yeah. 100 years later, we can't, well, about 30 years ago, most of us had telephones that we would converse with them. Now it's a text message and Zoom and whatever. So the principles are still the same. We connect with our family and friends. It's just a different platform how we connect there. So we absolutely don't forget the basic rules of learning and development. And they're the rules around, you know, kind of people know stuff beforehand. People like the social aspect of learning. Our brains love the social aspect of learning. So what I would say is, in terms of if you're thinking about your learning outcomes, first of all, are your learning outcomes measurable? So if your learning outcome is, by the end of this learning, it is to list 3 things about, then you've got a really clear, measurable learning outcome. If you've got a woolly, ambiguous learning outcome, like by the end of this you will know customer service, or by the end of this you will understand the key principles of data. What does that mean? That's not measurable. Understanding principles of data, you can do an MBA in it and still not understand all the principles of data. So make sure your learning outcomes are measurable, and make sure your activity, regardless of which platform you're using, follows that learning objective. All too often I've seen people design stuff where they start with typing on a PowerPoint slide, fill in some great activities, and then go, what are my objectives? No, design's the other way. So let's not forget that. Do I encourage micro learning? Someone's asked me in the Q&A. Yes, absolutely, I do. Short videos, and I emphasize short videos, are brilliant. Any video over about 7 minutes is not great. We don't engage with someone like I'm doing here, just stood talking. Now contrast that with a soap opera. So a soap opera lasts half an hour. People engage with that because the storylines, there are interweaving storylines. So all this thing about our attention span is only 20 seconds is rubbish, because people will engage with something they're engaged with for as long as it happens. So if you've got a boring video of someone just stood here and saying, you know, learning theory is really exciting and you should all learn learning theory because it's just the best thing ever, and let's start with behaviorism, because behaviorism is that no one's going to want to watch that more than 2 minutes. But if it's a video where you've got someone and you've got a mix of things like infographics on there, like animation on there, iPhone, iMovie, some amazing things. You could, and you know, going back to an earlier question, if we want to think about our own self-development, if you've got an iPhone, just have a look at what iMovie does, because it's just amazing. You can videos with graphics, and you can take pictures and add the pictures to the moving images. Really good quality. But what I'd say in terms of converting your 1 day, 2 day, 5 day into smaller bite-sized chunks, produce a map. Produce a map so your learner knows, your employee knows how they're navigating through this. So previously, by default, whether they enjoyed classroom training or not, by default, they knew the rhythm of that classroom training. It would start at this time, we would break at this time, we would have prayers at this time, we would have lunch at this time, we would finish at this time, we would have homework or we wouldn't have homework. Yeah, there was that rhythm. You need to demonstrate that rhythm. So if you're condensing it into smaller pieces, produce a map. Produce a map. One of the things that I am most proud of in my career, and it was very, very recently, was producing for a program that was primarily online a welcome pack. And that welcome pack was just a basic PDF, an interactive PDF, where the PDF landed in the learner's inbox, and it had 5 sections on it, and each section said click here. So opened it up, you opened the PDF up, it says welcome to your learning on the topic. Start by clicking on the welcome video, and so there's a space on the PDF that said welcome video. We clicked on that. The link took them to our YouTube page, so there was a welcome video, short video, me saying welcome to the program, this is what it's going to look like. Then there was a link to the program map, so they could then open the program map, and a link to one of our podcasts, and some reflective questions from that right at the start. And then they were able to follow the map through the rest of the learning program.
David, I think you've there's so much information in this.
Yeah. That's why I'm so pleased it's going to be a podcast, so people can listen, stop, rewind. Yeah, it's not just this hour. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think there's a few things that really stuck out for me. So the first thing, you use the analogy of using a letter versus now using digital. Yeah. Super simple. Everybody relates to that. But I guess for me, it's thinking both the letter and the SMS emoji text even reach the same objective, which is to communicate a clear message, what it might be. But the functions are different. So for example, I can't expect if I was looking to reproduce the amazing texture and smile line typography of a letter through eyes, I would not succeed. And so it goes back, really aligns with the idea that you can't think of reproducing what used to be there in a different way. You have to think, what function did this fulfill?
Yes.
And how, and put this first. So you're learning objectives first, and then find a way to develop the program of the product. Right. So I think for me that really stuck out, and really that is super key. We see, we talk about business plans all the time. We say, how can a company just start going without having a business plan? And that seems obvious. In the world of learning, we see way too often that we don't kick off with objectives. We just have a broad idea that we want to onboard somebody or share some skills, and this it is likely to make your teams more confused. And finally, what you've talked about, I guess, is the micro-learning and the mix of formats. So that goes back to the engagement. Yeah. In a classroom face context, you would normally have different elements, which could be, I don't know, your post-its, your presentation, you have your breakouts, you have your groups, and then they go and draw, or they go and cut paper, or whatever it is that they do, or film themselves. Digitally, sure, everything is digital, but just because the screen doesn't mean it's one thing. There is a million things you can do with the screen. Really mixing that up, I think, is a great tip that you've just shared with us. And I think linking to that, you and I had a discussion around supporting employees. So we are asking, well, obviously you HR professionals and L&D professionals, you are going above and beyond to support your people and while having to look after yourselves. But also your employees are very likely having to adapt to very constantly shifting priorities, new deadlines, and we all see this. And with no certainty, it can be very challenging. So how do we, whilst wanting to develop them and develop new skills perhaps, support our employees and recognize what they are doing in this context? Do you have a few tips around that, David?
Yeah, so we actually had a directorate away day a couple of weeks ago. So it was in the calendar, It was like, oh, suddenly we can't have a directorate away day because we're all in lockdown. But do you know, the feedback at the end of that day was it was one of the best away days. A load of people said, they don't like it when we just go into a big soulless conference room and people just shout stuff at you throughout the day about what different teams are doing. So what we did on that particular day, so each team within the directorate, they had a 15-minute slot. And so we were on WebEx, and the team presented what they were doing, but also the team were challenged after that 15-minute slot to share something with the rest of the directorate. So our team shared tea at 3, and we gave a little taster of what that looked like. Another team, because their 15 minutes finished just at lunchtime, they did a live cookery class. So one of the people in that team could cook an amazing tomato sauce. So she got quite a few people cooking a tomato sauce alongside them at that tea at 3. Sorry, at that directorate away day. So each team had a slightly different task to do after their 50-minute update on what they were doing, but it all involved engaging the rest of the directorate. So the challenge was, you've got to engage the rest of the directorate. Oh, and you've also got to make sure everybody has a 15-minute break away from the screen in the hour. So the kind of, each team had a 15-minute share stuff, engage people, and then make sure that people could go away for at least 15 minutes before the next team was due on. So I would say, think about how technology can maximize communication. Think about how technology can maximize communication, maximize interaction, maximize that socialization aspect of what you would do in an office. But you know, be very open to the fact that you can learn so much from that. Absolutely. So I would say also, one of the things I've said in face-to-face sessions, which is even more true now, I've said to L&D practitioners, just go and ask if you can sit on a different team's meeting. So not to present anything, but just to get a feel of what are some of the challenges going on within that team. And I'd say that's even more important now. So if you've got a team, if you know some of those, because if you've got your eye on the ball on performance across the whole organization, you know there may be some teams that are not performing very well. Just go and ask if you can sit on that particular team's meeting and just see what insights you can get, and just see what some of the things they're doing, and not there to say, look, I'm here to provide lots of solutions, because that's a big trap we make. We tend to set ourselves up for a bit of a fall. But look, let's go there almost like a consultant and say, look, I'm just really here to kind of work out what your reality is, and then work out where I can direct some resources that may be of use.
Amazing. I think, David, just I'm conscious we have 10 minutes left, and we do have to get to, but so we're talking about understanding people's challenges and making an effort to, again, through empathy. We talk a lot about empathetic leadership at this point, and it's really just putting ourselves in the shoes of the person we're trying to support, recognizing efforts, and again, those simple things. So starting small, starting easy with those simple team directorate meetings, team meetup, virtual coffee, and let those initiatives take off by themselves. So people start doing them by themselves without you having to be involved. Obviously, in your case, many of the people today will work for big organizations, so that will trickle down to line managers. But perhaps now more than ever, and I say this because I'm a line manager, more than ever, your line managers will need the support of HR and the guidance of L&D, because first of all, we know that over 60% of line managers in the region have never received any formal training. Now, in this context, the gap is even more heightened. So the final point we wanted to get to, we recently ran a Middle East market pulse survey around several priorities for HR and L&D professionals in the region. And one of the key things that we noticed really is a lack of trust. So we found that our survey found that over 60% of organizations were mildly or very concerned about the productivity of their employees at home. We know that when we talk about digital learning, unsurprisingly, over 90% of organizations are ready to embrace it. But the main concern is, how do I know that people are attending? And so this links back to a few questions that I think Vic has asked us today. How do I know people are attending? How do I get them to participate? How do we get people to know each other in a context that can be really hard? When you're delivering a face-to-face, you have that element of icebreaker, and we've had that for over 800 people in Saudi Arabia. And some cohorts who knew each other, that was more organic, but the ones who didn't know each other, it was more challenging. So how do you create, you spoke about the importance of communities. How do you create, again, that community, and how do you keep that ownership and measure ultimately the effectiveness of your initiatives digitally?
So, so I am on a training course myself right now. Not obviously right now, but at this moment in time, I'm on a training course so as a CIPD employee. That would have been face to face, but it's now moved online. So one of the things they've done is created a workbook. It's an interactive workbook with some links in, but they've paired us up, and after each session they swap the pairs around, so we get to know each other. So there's a few things going on there. So there's a bit of peer pressure that we've got to do the work, because we've got to demonstrate we've booked a meeting in to talk about some of the work we've got to do in between the sessions. So it's a series of 5 webinars we've got where we've got to do work and activities in between. So yeah, there's some degree of peer pressure to make sure we do it, and we check in with each other to do that work. That's fine for me, because yeah, I know I'm really busy, but also I know the value of doing work in between, and I know all this stuff about learning, and I know that's not always easy. But I think there's a balance with what is learning and development responsibility. So we provide the tools, we provide the platform, we provide the engaging stuff. And if our learners aren't doing it, yeah, we need to be encouraging them to do it, but it's not just our responsibility. It's the manager's responsibility as well. So learning and development in organizations is a fundamental part of what goes on every day in the organization. So, you know, if we've got to treat people like adults and say, look, if you don't do this, this is your choice. Is it really worth a conversation with your manager for not doing this? And if the manager's not supportive, then, you know, it's about being brave enough to say, actually, manager, you need some retraining on what your role is. So we need to be really assertive. We need to do it professionally, not in a confrontational way, but do it professionally. But recognize what's the role of the manager in helping us do this, in the manager helping. If we're delivering leadership and management training, where is that guidance in our leadership and management training? Where is it saying to our managers, look, you know, part of your role is to help your people develop. And if you don't do it, then the organization's going to say, why aren't you doing it? So I think there's a couple of things there. Make it engaging, put a bit of peer pressure, put the socialization around it, so you've got everything in place, but also don't forget the role of the manager and encourage the manager. It's part of their job.
Yeah, so make it engaging, switch formats every now, which means switch formats every now and then, design content that is fit to purpose, think of synchronous and asynchronous learning, which without saying those words, but so the webinar, live, face-to-face, to whatever session, and then what happens in between the sessions. And then give ownership, and remember that your line managers also have this role. Absolutely. And I think back to Vicky's question around, and we had someone else asking, how do I know that people are actively learning, actually learning? How do you measure behavioral change, for example? I think, well, we touched upon this just earlier, but I wanted to go back to it because someone felt didn't answer the question. Again, this part of the L&D process has not changed from whether it was face-to-face before. And it goes back to what David was highlighting earlier, which is having very clear learning objectives and desired outcomes. So if we are talking about changing behaviors, what is the behavior that we're seeking to achieve? Do we have a competence framework where the learner can see where they're starting from to go to. So you can always use the CIPD profession map for HR professionals, but for the rest of your team, you probably have your own competency framework. Lastly, Vicky was asking about, so we keep talking about engagement and community. And so how do people get to know each other? Well, really, David, you've hammered the point of social learning. So that could be asynchronous. That could be outside of this one webinar. It could be a WhatsApp group. It could be asking people to get into groups to do presentations that will still be virtual, but at least you're asking them to collaborate. And that could be very informal events like you've talked about, a quiz night, or to get people together. I think overall, I'll just caveat this with saying in the region, we have noticed an approach to performance management in general, which tends to translate into measuring learning effectiveness, which has been very focused on input rather than output. So traditionally, we know that organizations in the region will look at, are my employees sitting at their desks 6 hours a day? Are employees in time in the learning? Did they sign the sign-in sheet? And so that actually didn't give you any guarantee that they were being productive, they were learning, but it gave you reassurance. And so now that you can't physically be there to know that they're there, is the time to, which is a process, obviously we're aware of this, but you're talking, David, a lot about looking at outcomes. So thinking of outcomes and measuring against those outcomes. Do we have any questions that were not answered, or any point that you had in mind? So some people were asking about how to find a job or become a confident trainer. I think we'll leave these questions. I'm really sorry that but do we have anything? So is this being helpful, everyone?
And of course, we'll put some links in with the podcast about some fact sheets we've got on this.
Amazing. So it's great to see some people saying they really relate to this. I mean, it's good to see we're all in the same boat. We're all really we're having the same challenges. So I put some notes down in the chat throughout the session, which hopefully were helpful. You will receive a post-webinar email with some resources and links, and we will send you the podcast as soon as it's ready. If you want to see more of the amazing podcasts that are being produced by the CIPD team in the UK, and honestly, some are UK specific, I won't lie to you, but many are actually relevant. Honestly, timeless. I mean, I was just listening to a 2015 podcast, which is still absolutely relevant. So easiest for you is to type CIPD podcast. You will go straight onto our landing page. We're on SoundCloud. You can subscribe to SoundCloud and find us. And finally, David, you have told us about your book, so it's in the shelves. Not yet, is it? Is it on virtual shelves?
Published through Kogan Page, yeah. So Learning Development in the Workplace, 4th edition, Kogan Page. Thank you.
Kogan Page, can you remind me the title? I'm really sorry, I forgot the title, David.
Learning and Development in the Workplace, and it's the 4th edition one.
Amazing. And also, if you guys want more resources around how to help you navigate this crisis, you can go to cipd.ae/knowledge/coronavirus. We'll put this all in there. Don't forget to follow us on social. We've got tons coming up. Next week on the 20th of May, we have a webinar with Dr. Marshall Goldsmith on the occasion of International HR Day. We hope you can join us, and we have plenty more coming up. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
A virtual round of applause.
Cheers. Thank you, Charlotte. Catch you soon.
Thank you. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.